Hello and welcome to our webinar. I'm Chris McLaughlin, IT Ireland Network. I wish to welcome everybody today, both here online, here in Valentia, and also our friends and colleagues in Hearts Content. And at this stage, I would like to invite Tara Bishop from Hearts Content to say a few words. Tara.
Welcome everyone from Hearts Content, and thank you to Valentia for this opportunity again. I'd also like to pass thanks or congratulations along to Valentia on being accepted into the Irish tentative list for UNESCO. It seems as though we're well on our way to our designations on both ends. Today we're celebrating our 156th anniversary of the landing of the cable, and we will do a webinar throughout the morning. Sorry, it's afternoon in Ireland. I've been on Ireland time for the past couple of days. So I would like to first take part in the Morse code transmission to reenact one of the first messages from here to Valentia.
Yeah. Okay, folks, in what for Heart's Content and for the people here, what I received from Heart's Content before I reply to them, they will tell you what they got from me, I think. So our shore end has just been laid, and the most perfect cable under God's blessing has completed telegraphic communication between Heart's Content and Valentia, connecting Europe and the continent of America. So I think Canada will tell you what they got from me.
From Sean was Heart's Content, this is Valentia. We received your message, and yes, what a glorious day this is. May this connection be a permanent one. So thank you so much to Doug and Barry and to Sean for reenacting the first Morse code message traveled on the cable 156 years ago. I would now like to call upon our mayor, Doug Piercy, to bring greetings from the town.
Tara said I got 20 minutes. I got news for Tara. Anyway, good morning for coming out. Took time in your busy day, a warm day like this. Anyway, my name is Doug Piercy. I'm the mayor of what they call this beautiful town of Heart's Content for sure. And I want to thank the provincial historic sites for the opportunity to bring the greetings from town. Today we celebrate the 156th anniversary. We would like to officially offer special congratulations to Valentia for being named Ireland's short list. Got to start somewhere. Short list for UNESCO. Our two towns have a long history together. It was 156 years ago, and 156 years ago, I say it's only about John Warren and Towson remembers that here. I would say. Ted Rowe, you needn't laugh either. So anyways, again, thanks for having the opportunity to get here.
Thanks so much, Doug, for bringing greetings from the town and for the laughs this morning. Kind of lightens the mood a little bit. I'd next like to call upon Mr. Ted Rowe. He's a very well-known man here in this town and has done a lot for the heritage of this town. He's also sort of well-known all over the place. In many different hats, he's a musician, a historian, and a real estate agent in his previous life. So I'd like for him to come up and give a talk on the socioeconomic impact of the transatlantic cable on Heart's Content.
Thank you very much, Tara, and thank you to Provincial Historic Sites for giving me the opportunity to take part in the celebrations here today. I'm going to talk about the economic impact of the cable station on Heart's Content, which is only a small part of the impact that the cable had, of course, when it became operating in 1866. It was a worldwide phenomenon, turned into a worldwide phenomenon that had a major impact on commerce around the world. But in a little town like Heart's Content, it also had a big impact on the people and their lives. And I've kind of breaking this down into three areas in which the cable impacted commerce in Heart's Content. One is the direct impact of the cable in terms of the activities that they carried out. Second was some spin-off activities from the cable on other aspects of the community. And then thirdly, there's commerce that was attracted to the community because the cable station was here. Now this map is just to orient our friends in Valentia to know where we are here in Newfoundland. You see that's the Avalon Peninsula, which is the easternmost part of the island of Newfoundland. And you see Conception Bay, Trinity Bay, and Heart's Content is right in the middle there, the south side of Trinity Bay. Anybody who's here who just wandered in, don't know where they are either this morning, this will let you identify where it is that you are for this presentation. In Valentia, if you see right at the bottom of Trinity Bay, just to the left, that long, narrow inlet going in from the sea is Bull Arm, where the cable of 1858, which turned out to be unsuccessful, was landed before the Heart's Content cable in 1866. Now, a little bit about what Heart's Content was like as a community before the cable arrived. This is mapping and soundings of Heart's Content Harbour that was done for Cyrus Field in 1865 in order to know that the harbour at Heart's Content could accommodate the Great Eastern. They actually surveyed both Heart's Content and New Pelican and came to the conclusion that Heart's Content was going to be the spot where the cable was going to be brought ashore. And it's difficult to see from where you are and by the size of the screen what's labeled on the shore side of the drawing. But I just tell you that there's a church, a school, a fisherman's hall. There's a slip, which was a dockyard operated by the Rowe family just down below here. There's one wharf that's labeled, and that's the wharf that they were intending to use to land the cable, and that's on the property belonging to Elias Warren, who had, I would expect, what was the largest wharf in the harbor at that point in time. There's a house named the Telegraph House. So in 1864, there was already a house that was designated as a telegraph house. And there's a house that's labeled a striped house. And I think that that's probably a house that was used as a marker for mariners coming into the harbor to set a course on. So this is the following year, 1865, the year that the cable was supposed to land and didn't because it broke 600 miles offshore from Heart's Content, and the project was abandoned. But that summer, the press were here in droves, and people were here in droves from other parts of eastern Newfoundland, St. John's in particular. They all went home disappointed at not seeing the Great Eastern. But you can see from this drawing that comes from one of the newspapers of the day. And I don't know if you can see the range of, I'll just move over and point out the telegraph line. Yeah, and goes right up there to the telegraph house. So that's the line that was there ready to be connected in, not technically, but connected in through the operators with the information that was going to come along with the Great Eastern and the landing of the cable. Well, that didn't happen. It was the following year that the cable landed. That's Robert Dudley's painting of the telegraph house, where it was all supposed to take place in 1866. And here we are with the cable being brought ashore. Well, that's another of Dudley's paintings from July 27th, 1866. And that's Elias Warren's wharf. A bit of a ramshackle looking wharf, but most wharves were not built to last 100 years. Back in 1866, they were fishing premises and they were put up with whatever material was available. And if they lasted for a season or two, that was what they were designed to do. Anyway, you can see the cable being brought ashore there. Immediately upon landing the cable, Anglo-American Telegraph Company, which was Cyrus Field's company that had financed and managed the operation of landing the cable, immediately they began spending money in Heart's Content. They bought Warren's house and property right away within a week. Paid a huge amount of money for it in the day, $2,000 American, which was the kind of money that nobody in Heart's Content had ever seen before that. And they took over his house for the station because the telegraph house that was already there was seen right away to be inadequate. So they operated out of the telegraph house, that picture you just saw, for only less than 2 months. They moved their operation into Warren's house, which was better able to accommodate what they were looking for. They built another house on Warren's property, which they used as a housing accommodation for some of the staff. Plus, they started work on a larger station. And they moved into there in November. And that's the first cable station that they built. So in the first 6 months that the cable was landed in Heart's Content, they operated out of 3 different locations until they finally got it right in this one here. And this was built to actually accommodate both the Anglo-American Telegraph Company, the cable company, and the telegraph company itself, the landline company, which took the messages from the cable, put them onto a key and sounder, and sent them out across Newfoundland on a telegraph line under the Gulf of St. Lawrence by a cable, and then by landline cable down to Boston and New York. So by 1872, when this photograph was taken from the other side of the harbor, the population in Heart's Content was approaching 900 people. There were about 600 people here when the cable landed. 600 adults and about 170 small children, and some others in between. There were 3 general dealers in Heart's Content, 3 stores, and they were general purpose stores selling anything that anybody would need. Within, this is 1872, so within 6 years, you see, if you look across the harbor to here, you see that large apartment building. That was called Cable Terrace, and that was finished in 1869 as accommodations for the staff. That was a major investment that the company made in Heart's Content. That was the largest investment it had made up to that point in time. That was the largest building in Newfoundland outside St. John's. It was designed by a Dublin architect, and I've never been able to find the name of the Dublin architect who designed it, and I've often wondered if it was the same architect that designed the cable houses and eventually the cable station in Valentia. I wouldn't be surprised if it was. So some of when this accommodation was built, a lot of the spin-off work for people in Heart's Content and spin-off economic activity from the station came about in the form of domestic help that was hired to help out with the living accommodations. I would venture a guess that there was not a family that worked for the cable station that did not have a girl hired to help with the housework and take care of the chores of running a household. Most of those came from Heart's Content, although they ran out of girls from Heart's Content at one point in time, and there were girls from New Perlican and even as far away as Winterton that came to work for cable families in Heart's Content. And they were paid a decent wage, which was a great boost and support to their families, because most all the families in Heart's Content in 1866, when the cable landed, 88% of the people were fishermen. That's almost 9 out of 10 people were fishermen. And were living with the wages which were not guaranteed by any stretch of the imagination. We're living on the wages that a fisherman could make by catching and making salt fish and selling it to the merchant. Some years were much better than others, but fishing was not an occupation where there was a lot of money on the go. So having the daughters of some of the fishing families work for cable families would have been a boon to many of the families living in Heart's Content at the time. Now, that building was demolished in the 1930s. In 1876, they completed and moved into the building that we're in here today. And that took a couple of years to build. There was a lot of trouble with the work crew on that building. I think part of the reason is that it was the first masonry building to be built in Heart's Content. It's still the only masonry building in Heart's Content, apart from the powerhouse. And it is one of the landmark buildings in Heart's Content. The Heart's Content Lighthouse and the Heart's Content Cable Station are the two landmark buildings. And this one is still standing and still in very good repair since 1876. There were further building proceeding in Heart's Content in the 1870s and the 1880s, and most of it was additional housing. These houses on the hill, which are still standing, the one on the left is the superintendent's house, and the duplex on the right was for senior operators. These buildings were built in the finest style of the day. They were what you'd call executive housing these days. And they were built by a builder from St. John's who was building that style of houses for the well-to-do merchant class in St. John's. And there were 6 of them altogether, these 3 on the hill and 3 other individual houses built around the community, or the central part of the community. And these 3 are still standing. The other 3, 2 of the other 3 have been demolished, and the third one has been renovated so that you wouldn't recognize it as this style of house anymore. Here's another piece of development work that the Cable Office did, which was in building this private school, a one-room school called Lakeview School, which wasn't restricted to families of the cable station, but you had to pay a tuition to get in there. And most of the people in Heart's Content either couldn't afford, or if they could, didn't want to pay a tuition to have their children educated when they could send them to the other public school here, which didn't cost them very much at all. So that building was demolished in the 1950s. They also built, or the Methodist members of the cable station built this church, which is still standing, which is used today by the Mizzen Heritage Society as an arts center and a performance venue. That church was completed in 1879, and there was an extension added on 10 years later. Perhaps the most impressive building that was built by cable staff with the help of others in the community, but the project was spearheaded by the cable staff, so it's not another big part of their impact on the community was St. Mary's Church of England Church, which stood on the hill overlooking Heart's Content and was the landmark building in Heart's Content for 100 years. It was finished in 1885 and was the largest wood frame church outside St. John's in Newfoundland at the time. It was destroyed by fire in 1989. That's Heart's Content in 1891, and as you can see, it's quite a bit more of a bustling community than what appeared on the slide for 1865 that we had up a little earlier. There's been that you can see the church, the cable houses on the hill. You can see another one of the cable houses there in the center of the picture, and a lot of other building that's gone on. Some of it by, most of it actually, by people connected with the cable station. But the Heart's Content is developing into a bustling little town by the 1890s and by the end of the century, and the population had grown to about 1,200. And there were now 5 general stores in town rather than the 3 that were there in the 1860s. And there was a branch of the Newfoundland Savings Bank in Heart's Content, where the businessmen could all put their money. 22 operators at the cable station, plus there were outside hands as well. Outside hands meaning people who looked after the buildings, a carpenter, a plumber, the electrician was actually working at the station, but other people who did grounds work for them. So in 1898, that's the cable station, and you can see that Heart's Content is starting to look, or parts of it are starting to look more like an English village than a Newfoundland fishing outport. That was one of the major impacts that the investment that the cable company made in the town, was to change the appearance of the town and make it more accommodating to the people, the Englishmen who were here as part of the staff. It made them feel more at home, I guess, to make the town look like an English village. Now you can see on the left of the picture there, that's one of the businesses that was operating in Heart's Content at that point in time. That business was owned by the Gillard brothers from Harbour Grace, and was one of the 5 businesses operating in Heart's Content at the turn of the century. Now that is another view from the harbour. You see the church, but what I want to point out to you here is the long 2-story building down towards the right-hand side of the picture. That building was built in the early 1900s to house what were called the cable stores. And that was a small department store owned by Eyre & Sons in St. John's, which opened in 1906. And it really brought a new level of retailing to Heart's Content. The cable stores sold just about anything that you wanted to buy. They had home delivery by horse and cart. They had a staff of 4 and a manager, and they operated for a couple of decades in Heart's Content. And it was a major addition to the community that was brought here because of the cable, an outside investment that came here because of the cable station. Now, in the second decade of the 1900s, the cable station, the cable operation in Heart's Content and in other places was taken over from Anglo-American by Western Union. And they did further major investment in the facility in Heart's Content. There they are building on the extension in 1918. The cable staff during the First World War reached its peak. The cable business was extremely busy. The traffic was very heavy. There were 6 cables going through Heart's Content by that point of time, all of them busy. The population of Heart's Content reached about 1,500 at its peak, and there were about 200 people working at the cable station back in that heyday. And there's the new station completed. Also, Western Union was involved in providing more housing for staff. They built those 2 duplexes on the hill just behind the station. Plus, there were 6 houses that were built for cable operators around the community, 6 more in addition to the ones that Anglo had built back in the 1880s. Those houses there are still standing. One of them is standing better than the other at the moment. But one has been refurbished and brought back to life and is rented as apartments. The other one is still waiting a new life. The number of businesses in Heart's Content started to grow as well. There were a number of small businesses. That's John George's store in Southern Cove. The cable staff dropped off after the First World War and declined steadily in the 1920s until there were only 15 or 20 staff left by the early 1930s. But Heart's Content held its own as a place of business because it had established a reputation. So it was a shopping center for Trinity South, really. People came from Newfoundland, Winterton, further down the shore, from up the shore, to do business in Heart's Content. And there were, by the 1950s, there were actually 11 places. When I was growing up, there were 11 places of business in Heart's Content. This is one of the original ones, a Hopkins store that was taken over as a pharmacy, and then by the Smith family as a grocery store. And that's the only store of this style left standing in Heart's Content. I don't know for how much longer, but there really needs to be a value placed on that building, because it's the only one of its kind of the small businesses that were operating in Heart's Content for so long. That's an area of Heart's Content called Rose Bank, and this picture was taken in 1945. And along that strip of the harbor, there were 4 separate businesses operating when that picture was taken. You can see there our own family business, the business of John S. Rowe and Sons. There's a little store there, you see the back of it. And then as you move further along, you get to Sinyard store and this other traditional store that was owned by Fred Farnham. And here's a little store just across from my house. John S. Rowe and Sons was started by John S. Rowe, who was one of the outside hands at the cable station. And he had a racket with the superintendent back in the early part of the 1900s, because the policy of the company in providing coal for their employees was that they would supply a year's supply of coal to the operators and the inside workers, as they were called, but they would only supply 2 tons of coal to the outside workers. And my grandfather, John S. Rowe, went to the superintendent and said he didn't think that was hardly fair, that they were getting a year's worth of coal if they worked inside, but they were only getting 2 tons of coal, and then do what you can after that if they were part of the outside crew. And he was a plumber, part of the outside workers. So the superintendent said there's no way he was going to change that policy. So John S. Rowe ordered in a shipment of coal from North Sydney, sold off what he didn't need himself, and kept enough for a year. From that, he built up a business that eventually became a hardware store, tinsmith shop, plumbing and heating business, and with a large coal shed, which you can see in behind there. And the best part of the story is that when the cable company, when Western Union decided they were going to give up bringing coal in for their employees, they gave the contract for supplying coal to the employees to John S. Rowe. A couple of other things I'll mention quickly that came to Heart's Content because of the cable station being here. One was electricity. The first hydroelectric company was United Towns Electric, and they had a group of shareholders, many of whom were cable operators in Heart's Content. They built a small hydroelectric station in Victoria, just over in Conception Bay from here. And it opened in 1905, and they brought a line to Heart's Content in 1906. That was the first electricity in Trinity Bay, and one of few outport communities in Newfoundland that was serviced by electricity, actually. Then this station was built in Southern Cove and came on stream in 1919, and that station has been replaced by a more modern one since then. The second thing that came to Heart's Content, second industry because of the cable station, was rail service. And the railway came in 1915, and that provided not only a great service for transportation in and out of Heart's Content, but it provided a source and a center of employment for other people other than the cable station. The branch line to Heart's Content ended here and connected in with the main line in Whitburn, which went across the whole island of Newfoundland. You can see the light-colored buildings there are storage sheds, and that was the third thing that came to Heart's Content because of the railway and because of the cable station being here. And that was the supply of supply of paper from the paper mill in Grand Falls in the center of the island, which could not ship paper from Botwood, which was their main shipping port, in the winter because of ice conditions. So they chose Heart's Content as a second port to ship the paper out of in the months of the year when Botwood was not available. And so Heart's Content had paper, what they called paper boats, coming in once or twice, sometimes 3 times a year, to pick up paper from Heart's Content that was made in Grand Falls, shipped from Heart's Content as a shipping port to England. So that's the long picture of the pier that the paper boats would tie up at. So that's about the story of Heart's Content and the effect it had on the, or the cable station, the effect that it had on the commerce of Heart's Content. We still have a very vibrant community here. The people, our friends in Valentia, that's the story of Heart's Content, and the center part of the area has been designated as a heritage district. You can see right there at the back of the picture, the far end, you can see the fishing wharf, because fishing is still the mainstay of the community, as it was when the cable came in 1866. And I guess now we're back to where we started, at the cable station. Thanks very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you so much, Ted. It's really appreciated today to see how far we've actually come. Heart's Content is certainly a landmark on the Trinity Shore as it is today. So thank you very much. I just have to check my sheet and see where we are. Oh, we're at a little break, so everybody can sort of get up and move around and get rid of the heat for a little bit.
I'd like to invite Derek Cassidy now to make his presentation. Derek?
Right, submarine cables and a change in the evolution process. These are just the sections of the actual presentation which I'll be talking about. Right, it all started in 1848 when Henry Bewley decided to actually look at how cables themselves could actually be protected from water. And he came up with a process where he could actually put good aperture over a telegraph wire to create an actual telegraph cable that could actually be buried. The telegraph cable itself could also be put underwater. In 1850, the very first telegraph submarine cable was invented. It actually went from Dover to Calais. Also in 1850, in the exact same day, the very first fishing issue happened when a fisherman picked it up, a French fisherman, seen the cable, didn't know what it was, thought it was seaweed and cut the cable. Since 1850, all submarine cables have been armored, and that is the actual process that has actually now changed and has brought on the submarine cables to what we see them today. From 1850, it also opened up the idea that cables themselves can actually be can actually be laid across rivers and lakes and seas, so that the barriers which were at the time stopping the actual process of comms across the world have now been broken. Telegraph systems from 1850 to 1866 and 1829 or 1929 overcame huge processes in our system and actual the design and science. For instance, in 1857-58, when the first transatlantic telegraph cable was laid, the maximum amount of words can actually be done per a minute was 2, while in 1866 it actually changed to 8, and by 1900 it actually changed to 300 words in a minute. You can actually see also the submarine cable that was laid in 1866. It's a Telegraph 7-stranded copper core, and it's surrounded by armoring wire. On the right-hand side, you see a presentation box. This is an example of the 1857-58 cable The 65 cable, which failed and was respliced and delivered in 1866, along with the 1866 cable. Down in the bottom right, you also see the SS Great Eastern. This is the ship itself that actually aided the process of the transatlantic cable getting in one go all the way across from Valentia to Hearts Content on the 27th of July 1866. This opened up a whole process of markets themselves. The birth of the international market was born. The fact is, people in London can actually check the cotton markets in the US by checking the actual markets by sending messages across to the stock market in New York and getting the answer back in minutes, as opposed to waiting by sending a letter a couple of months beforehand and waiting up to 4 weeks, where cotton prices could have changed. So it opened up the markets, and it opened up the whole process that people could actually now spend money across the globe by the fact is that the telegraph itself had enabled long distance comms. This is a map. It's from 1901 and actually shows the telegraph systems as they've grown across the world. Considering that 40 years earlier there was no telegraph wires across any ocean, and now 40 years later it's covered. There's one thing associated with this map is this map covers the exact same routes that are covered by submarine cables today. The routes that are followed. Basically, when you lay an actual sub cable today, you actually do come across old telegraph cables that can be down as more than 150 years old. Then came the era of coax and voice. Between 1929 and 1956, telegraph cables and coax cables were designed and laid across seas. They weren't laid across oceans yet because they hadn't come up with a way of actually transmitting a voice call over that actual distance. But over the telegraph system, you could actually send up to 300 words a minute, which was the top of which they could do, or one voice call. However, that changed in 1956, when TAT1 was actually laid. TAT1 was a submarine cable that was laid from Canada to Scotland. It allowed for 36 telephone calls. Unfortunately, for someone to receive a call back, you needed another submarine cable. So TAT1 number 2 was laid to actually send the return calls again. So basically, you would actually make a call, talk to somebody, and they would actually talk to you on the other cable. However, the Irish Post and the Telegraph came up with an idea of actually taking 2 coax cables and making them into a balance system. Therefore, they could actually double the transmission rate, and that was in 1947. It was approximately 9 years before its time, but it was actually 20 years before the people understood that the fact is that you can actually use the balance system to actually increase the amount of traffic you could have across the cable. For instance, there's an example of TAT1. As you can see, it's not unlike an actual telegraph cable. The design is the same, the cores are the same, and this uses a copper core as well. The armoring is the same. There's no real difference between the two. The only difference is what's actually carried across it. So TAT1 actually carried voice signals, as opposed to telegraph signals before, telegraph cables carrying dots and dashes and pulses. The actual voice itself could be carried on TAT1. TAT1 went all the way up to TAT7, which was still a coax system. However, everything changed in 1986 when TAT8 came. TAT8 was a different system, which looked at the whole idea of how a coax works and how to increase the actual voice. If you see an example here of TAT1 again, you see the 1865 cable, there's no real difference between the two, right? Again, the picture below shows an example of a coax and a telegraph cable. The design is the same, everything is actually the same. The only thing that's different is the actual signaling that's actually carried across it. But as I said, TAT8 changed everything. TAT8 brought about the idea of optical. Optical comms across the globe actually changed the whole world. From 8 words a minute in 1866 to 35 voice calls in 1956 to 40,000 voice channels in 1988 when the submarine cable was actually turned on. It was laid between 1986 and 1988 after tests were carried out. And it proved so good that it was the launch of optical comms across the globe. From 1988, all submarine cables are now optic. Even Ireland got the very first submarine cable in 1988, BTTE1. It was the third submarine cable, optical submarine cable laid in the world, and it actually came to Ireland. Optical voice, data, and video on the World Wide Web from 1988 to 2011 to 2018. The optical network actually operated on the submarine side of things from 1988 up to 2011 as a system that was owned and operated by the big players, people who could afford to actually build and operate and lay an actual sub cable. They were mainly the likes of AT&T, BT, NTT, companies that had the actual revenues to actually do it. But in 2011, that all changed. The carrier neutral submarine cables came in. These were submarine cables that allowed other operators, other people to come in and actually rent or buy dark fiber off these cables. So basically, smaller companies who always had an idea of becoming a worldwide company could now lease a pair of fibers off these sub cables and now become national and wider and further afield network operators by having access to subsystems. As you see, this is a 2011 map. There's not much difference between the 2011 map and the 2001 or the 1901 map. It's 110 years later, but basically the same routes are being used because they found out that these are the shortest and quickest routes to use, because the seabed itself is not known that well. So by understanding the seabed routes where the submarine cables go, you can understand what's the best option to use. And if you overlaid one map with the other, you wouldn't actually see much difference between the two of them. But a milestone was reached in 2018 when the first privately owned and operated and non-commercial system was built for the data centers. The hyperscalers, as we call them, the Googles, the Amazons, these are hyperscalers where they're content owners. They deliver content to people on the broadband, the World Wide Web. They also operate the data centers to store this and the services which they have. But now they actually connect their own data centers to each other, now creating a larger footprint across the globe where they can actually now connect to different countries and create their own regional centers. The data center itself, I know they've been in the news recently about using up too much power, but they don't actually use up as much power as what people think, because basically an awful lot of data centers in Ireland actually give more energy back to the grid. But these hyperscalers are now looking at the whole concept of extending the reach of their footprint. So basically, to actually do that, they're building their own subcables so that they can actually extend it like a web. It is monitored and there is certain rules and guidelines they always follow. But the fact is that they're bringing the information closer to the people who physically want to use it. So you no longer have to log on to Google and get onto a server somewhere in the States. You're now actually logging onto a server in your own home country, your own hometown, for instance, where the information is coming down faster and quicker to you. By the fact is that the hyperscalers now are using their own submarine cables to actually connect up their own servers to actually get the info to you. Here's a snapshot, for instance, in 2018 of what the data was like across the globe. As you see, it's nearly all concentrated around China, certainly in Europe and the States. That's not saying that the rest of the world doesn't use it, because it does, because you can see the green lines, which are info, which are full pipes, full cables with data actually spreading across the globe. But it is all changing. The optical fiber itself can only carry so much data. So basically, the likes of Google, Amazon, the submarine cable operators, the network operators, they're all coming together to understand how can we increase the actual capacity, how can we increase the content, how can we get more data, because it's not them trying to get the data out to the consumers who want it. It's the consumers who want the data because they're consuming an awful lot more. And of course, the last 2 years of the lockdown because of COVID has actually proved that the fact is that if you can work from home, it has proved that the data is getting to you somewhere. How is it physically getting to you? It's because the broadband, it's because the internet, the World Wide Web has actually grown so much. The information is actually there. It's because the network operators, the submarine cable operators, the hyperscalers have all come together and they've all agreed a plan where they can actually bring all the information closer to the user. But of course, we go back to 1850, a submarine cable break where the French fishermen accidentally cut the very first cable itself. This still happens today. Accidents. That's why submarine cables, again, as I said, are covered in armor. As you see, here's an actual cable itself which was damaged. But that's the whole idea of actually trying to extend the life of an actual cable. Trying to get more data, you need more cables on the actual in the actual ocean as well. But there's rules which they follow and things like that. So basically, as I said, there's issues in getting all this info to the people who want to use it. So basically, one of the main ways of overcoming that is increasing the armor, increasing the fiber count of the cables you're using, increasing the amount of bandwidth which you can use as well, and it's increasing the number of cables as well to try and get that bandwidth to the people in the end. They're using different types of cable as well. They're using the original single core now to a multi-core cable. They're using increased systems to actually help do this, but it also has downtime. Multi-core fibers have problems with splicing. The multi-fiber systems have problems with getting them fixed. And the test and the maintenance, the testing equipment required for these sub cables are still being tested and trialed today. So basically, broadband itself has actually come to it's a small barrier which has to be climbed over. It's the amount of bandwidth which you can get into a fiber safely to get to the actual people who want to use it in a way that actually increases the usage and makes it safe and helps deliver quicker, trying to get the information to the edge. There is also other ways of doing it. There's increasing the bandwidth. There's increasing the actual channel counts. There's all of this actually brings you closer to the thing called the channel limit, where signal to noise ratio can actually kill the signal off. So there's other ways of trying to overcome the problem of increasing the bit per channel to increase the actual content. These are things which everyone is still looking at. Overcoming these will just be as like overcoming how to actually get an actual transatlantic cable across the ocean 156 years ago, how to increase the actual bandwidth on an optical fiber, to increase the actual thing to let somebody get more data quicker and faster. But as I said, over the last 2 years, the amount of people that are actually now working from home, still logging into their corporate servers, has actually meant the data and traffic has actually just blew up. technically between February and May 2020, the amount of data across the networks actually tripled. That wasn't because there was more people actually taking on the data. It was because the corporate networks, which were still operating, were now actually operating on a system where everyone working from home had to log in as well. So therefore, the pipes, if you want to call it, the normal network that was capable of carrying the corporate network during the day and the domestic network in the evening, now had to actually operate and carry both of them during the exact same time span during the day. They also have to extend it as well, because most people who started work at 9 and finished at 5 found out they were starting work at 7 and finishes at 9 in the evening. Therefore, the working day got actually bigger as well. But the saving grace behind of all of this was the actual the data center that actually had the capacity to store all this, the information, to have the content that was required by the actual people, by the staff, by the content users, was actually close at hand. So what we want to do is we want to connect the submarine cable system into the data center, make the actual transmission speed faster, make it get to the end user quicker. For instance, the data center, as we've heard today, people are actually giving out about that we're using too much power and all that, but they're all evolving into a newer design, a design that technically you can bring a submarine cable system into an actual center now and connect into any customer you want to. Normally a submarine cable lands in an actual cable station, and then from the cable station it's backhauled into a network switch, and then from network switch to one of these centers. Now it's actually being delivered directly to the actual data center, so that the consumers who want to actually consume this content can actually get it straight away, rather than waiting for another couple of hours or days to try and get it built up and connected through the actual network itself. It's already been sent in. For instance, the ESAT2 cable is directly to a center. The cable itself connects directly into CIX in Cork. There's new ways of now delivering submarine cables to the network that can actually increase the content. So when you're at home, when you're logging on to Google or something like that, and you're downloading some info on some page or something like that, that's actually coming from a data center that could be just down the road. That's actually being transmitted and stored in that center, but it actually originally came from another server, probably from somewhere around the world, came to you in seconds, even less than actual seconds, that you wouldn't even know how fast it traveled. But the fact is that the data center around the corner actually has stored all that info as well, that when you actually download it, you've noticed download speeds are getting bigger and quicker. It's because the information is just there. But it's not just about network operators and developing systems where they can actually get to the consumer. It's also about the next generation. It's also about how we can actually expand the network. It's about medical devices. It's about making science the heart of comms. It's about how to actually make AI, how to increase the actual content, how to make it easier for content users to actually get the content they're looking for. For instance, bringing the network closer to the edge means that what you're doing is you're allowing all these different social media, you're allowing science, the normal online content which people use today, you're allowing that to be at the people's touch. So basically the 5G phones people have, the social media, the content, the video, the streaming, everything is all contained in an actual server on some data center, which is connected to a submarine cable, which is connected to a data center somewhere else, combining all this content, allowing it to get to people in the end quicker and faster. But it's also looking at a thing called quantum. Quantum computing is so fast that the fact is that now there's a research project, a combined project between Ireland, France and Germany, where they're using submarine cables, data centers to actually house these systems so that they can actually do an awful lot of fast computing. The amount of information and the amount of processing that these systems can do, it's impossible for a university, for instance, to house one of these. But a data center which has the power, has the capability and the processing power to actually match these systems are already being built, that they can actually now, there's a, as I said, it's a joint project to see can these systems actually work. And it's including the submarine cable systems, the data centers, the network operators to in one big package to see can they overcome how quantum computing can nearly get as fast as the speed of light. But we also have a thing called submarine networks. They're not just comms. For instance, in Galway Bay, we have a thing called a Spark Bay system where submarine cables are now connected to sensors. They're actually checking the water speed. They're actually checking the how cold it is, how hot it's getting. They're also checking subsea ground movements. So submarine cables themselves are not just used for comms anymore. They're used for sensors. They're expanding into the wider field. So eventually, you'll find cables themselves, optical fiber cables, will be used for an awful lot of wider systems that are other than just sending content from one person to another. They're also used to actually connect sensors. The group I'm working in are working on numerous projects. Valentia Island, for instance, is one project. Clare Island is another project where we're actually trying to increase the digital systems on these two islands and bring them into the 21st century, and even try and even push them further so that they be years ahead of other places as well, so that the bases behind our comms, they become digital systems, digital islands. And I'm also working on a history project where people are trying to bring the past to life again, but it's trying to understand the actual the heritage around where submarine cables landed and how they can actually be developed further. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody. I've been asked to give a talk on the history of Valentia Coast Guard radio station, which would have been the coastal station, going back to 1914. So, John Draper, I'm the divisional controller for Valentia Coast Guard, the regional division as well. So we're covering an area from basically the Midwest of Ireland, just below Clifton, above Galway Bay. And we go down then to Youghal, and we go out just on the south of Ireland. We cover out then as far as 15 degrees west, which is about 200 nautical miles west, covering that full division. Within that division, we coordinate just our SAR resources, search and rescue resources. We have 18 Coast Guard units comprising different disciplines. We have rescue boats from the Coast Guard. We also have cliff climbing response units. We have drone units, and we also have search units within the Coast Guard disciplines. We also coordinate the 12 RNLI lifeboats, both all-weather and inshore lifeboats, that we coordinate with as well. We have also, there's up to 5 community rescue boats. So all these resources cover the coast within that section of the division of the Coast Guard, covering effectively a third of the country. The other 2 stations then being MRCC Dublin, and also the station Malin Head Coast Guard Radio, which in actual fact started in 1902. So that's the background. Just in relation to tying it in with the whole cable history, I mean, my own thoughts, just it really was the first phase, or part of the first phase of the communications revolution. And that feeds into what we do in the Coast Guard every day. You know, there developments the whole time, be it vessel traffic tracking, aircraft tracking, and all these things are visible on our screens. We can track them and monitor them. We can receive 999 calls, emergency response calls, and we can track through the mobile phone the position of the person. We can switch on their data through the systems, through the emergency calling system, and see where they are on the mapping systems. This all goes back, as far as I can see, to this cable, this first cable. It was the first tentacle of the transatlantic network. And on top of that, then all the benefits of that from a commercial point of view, a monetary point of view, the instantaneous connection of markets, companies being able to transfer information and data very quickly. There was an anecdote that I looked up on the internet there a couple of years ago, and it was something along the lines of, the empire and the dominions of the empire. You had the local governors and administrators, and some of them were horrified at this prospect that suddenly, as opposed to an 8-week turnaround, suddenly they were getting telegrams requesting information at the drop of a hat. And this didn't bode too well. I can definitely have sympathy in that regard. And we're probably all in that way when you think about it. Now we have emails, we're carrying them in our pockets. There's pinging of emails, social media, and there's nearly an overload at this stage of data and information. On one hand, you nearly be cursing the inventors on this stage, but certainly from the point of view of the Coast Guard, 24/7 communications and the increase in data speeds, it's benefiting us the whole time. We're able to be more efficient in how we respond to vessels or any craft in difficulty at sea. You look at the date here, 1858 and 1860, and the completion of that cable. 1858, it's less than a decade. Previous to that, we had the famine in Ireland, and even on the island here in Valentia, I know there was a little bit more isolated than the mainland Carsavine, but there was some very severe effects on a lot of lives lost around 48. It's hard to reconcile the two developments, the famine, and then 10 years later, then the development of one of the first phases of the communications revolution. Quite a hard thing to reconcile sometimes. From a maritime point of view, in the Coast Guard, the SS Great Eastern, what a vessel, an incredible size for its time, designed by Brunel, nearly 700 feet. It was 40 years before you had the Lusitania, the Titanic with the same capacity. Absolutely unbelievable. They were able to carry 4,000 passengers, this vessel, and up to 8,000 to 10,000 troop movements were mentioned down to India, with the Connaught Rangers and the Munster battalions being brought down by this vessel. So incredible capacity. And few of the other key points about this vessel was the captain, or actually it's the captain, the first officer at the time was William Halpin, Wicklow man. He was navigator at the time. And I think it was his skills and success at recovering the damaged cable on the second run, or the successful run, that resulted in the reconnection of the cable and making the first successful connection at that stage. Another anecdote there that I liked it as well was that there was one story about one of the sailors getting caught up on the mast and terrified up the top, and that he climbed up himself, the first mate did, and brought him down slowly. Managed to secure him around his neck, and made his way down slowly to much acclaim, and even this was even fed back into the media at the time, made him quite well known and quite widely acclaimed. So that's the SS Great Eastern. From a maritime communications point of view, obviously the Morse code being the method of transmission of message down the land-based cables, and then the transatlantic cables. But for us in the maritime world, the development then of the radio apparatus by Marconi, well, more the perfection of it at that stage, and the first test between Ballycastle and Rathline on the north of Ireland. And he also did tests in the Bristol Channel and also the English Channel as well before perfecting it. And there was a network then of coastal radio stations being developed. And this was for not only commercial reasons for transmitting traffic back and forth on vessels when they come into range, and getting information, commercial information or private information from people on board who wanted to transmit personal message, etc. This was developed, but one of the main reasons was the safety for traffic vessels at sea. So 1901, you had Crookhaven Coast Guard Radio, or the Crookhaven Radio, and that's down in the southwest of Ireland here. It wasn't until 1910 that it was decided then that it would be moved up to Valentia, and that was building was commenced in 1912, and 1914 then the vessel was the station was commissioned and the equipment from Crookhaven was brought up, and that was the equipment that was used at the time. And 1909 then it was transferred to the British Post Office, because having been run by Lloyd's of London and Marconi at the same time, it was transferred in 1909. 1914, obviously the key date there, 14-18 war was to kick off at that stage. So the personnel then in the station were commissioned to operate that station were mostly military personnel, naval personnel. But the first OIC, or officer in charge at that stage, was William G. Harrison, and he was transferred from Seaforth Radio. Other key dates there as history progressed, you had the treaty ports were handed back to Ireland from the UK at that stage. And then 1951, the station of Valentia was only transferred back to the Irish state. So although a lot of the radio officers and signalmen would have been from 1922 at the formation of the Irish state, would have been mostly Irish at that stage, and would have been they would have relieved the British personnel in around the early 1920s, 1920, 1922. The picture there, it's obviously a picture of a Sparks on and the SOS, and also the method of transmitting developed by Marconi at the time, prior to the establishment of the message SOS. But the CQD, or all stations distress, would have been transmitted by the Marconi operators. And it was the German system, the SOS, that was internationally adopted, then agreed and regulated, then used thereafter. The vessel you're looking at there, when you think of the people in Heart's Content there today, now that's about 370 nautical miles south-southeast of Newfoundland, and that's the Titanic, 2.5 miles underneath, and there's the bow and the main anchor. 1,517 lives lost. It was 1912. So Valentia, came on stream just after that, effectively 2 years. But also in 1914, you had the development then with the Safety of Life at Sea Convention, the International Safety of Life at Sea Conference in America, and all the signatories to that convention agreed that two of the key things from our point of view, certainly in the Coast Guard, and still there today, that all commercial vessels carrying over 50 passengers carry enough lifeboats to cater for all passengers and crew on board. This not being the case in Titanic at the time. The other key one from the point of view of the communication side is that the development of the Marconi radio apparatus, that it was regulated that all these passenger vessels carrying over 50 would carry the radio apparatus and would have it manned by radio operators and a continuous watch for 500 nautical miles offshore. The idea being that the coastal radio network would hopefully pick up any signals then and within that range off coast. So it was the safety, maritime safety was a big driver after the Titanic, and we're certainly part of that today. Things haven't changed; they've only developed. We've made our systems, our response system, our response mechanisms, the advent of satellite technology for tracking and notifying Coast Guard stations where there are vessels in difficulty, being either by digital selective calling, the automatic DSC messages being sent, and the terrestrial network, and then the satellite emergency position indicated radio beacons. That's Valentia. That's a picture in the early 20s of Valentia, of the coastal radio station, now the Marine Rescue Coordination Centre of Valentia, or Valentia Coast Guard as we still call ourselves. The wireless station, known colloquially, Rinadrolon Point there. It's an incredible place to work. on a day-to-day basis. Beautiful vista, beautiful views out to the Blaskets and out to the Atlantic. Amazing sunsets, amazing sunrises. The only difference today is we've taken off all the pitch roofs because they couldn't last the storms at the time. Constantly the roof was being ripped off, the tiles. When you look at that, you see those huge masts that were there. I don't know whether up to 40, 50 meters, but made of solid mahogany and able to withstand the storm. So there are masts there today, almost in the exact same locations, and we use those to communicate on MF. That's 282 kilohertz, and also our working frequencies. We still monitor 2182. Some jurisdictions around the world are not monitoring 2182 on voice, but they're doing it on digital selective calling. So when you send a digital selective message, it's picked up automatically. We still monitor the RT side, the radio telephony side. So if a fishing boat, for example, doesn't get a chance or doesn't, for whatever reason, doesn't hit the automatic DSC, but they call a mayday by voice, we'll still pick that up. So these are the builders that were involved back in 1912, built the station. So those same walls, we're still working within those same walls. And the kitchen that we have today, there was one annex built, and that's where our new communications coordination room is now. What was the radio room up to 1981, between 1922 or 1914 and 1981, is the kitchen now. And the last messages, last signals to the Lusitania would have been broadcast by WT from that kitchen, which was the radio room then. It's an interesting one. One of the builders here, his name was Mick Paul Murphy, and they were all the Murphys. Subsequently, over the years, were given the moniker J.P. Jones, or the famous Mick Paul Murphy of the John Paul Jones Hall of Fame. J.P. Jones was a slave trader, privateer, and the great-grandfather of Mick Paul Murphy, the builder in this picture, was fishing off Valentia back at the time in the 1700s at that stage, late 1700s. He was press ganged, captured and press ganged into service. And that J.P. Jones was later one of the first naval commanders in the US Navy. So just an interesting anecdote on that side to do with the builders. This is the first telegram, or that was the telegram that was sent to the first OIC that was commissioned to work in the station, or appointed to work in the station, should I say, 1914. Officer in charge, wireless Seaforth station. Proceed Valentia tonight, if convenient. And he did. He took the train up to, I believe, Liverpool, and then got the passage across then to Dublin, and then made way down by train then to Valentia, and got there, I think, the next day. The Lusitania, as I said, that anecdote really is just about the idea of the communications room. The last messages to Lusitania would have been through Valentia. At that stage, obviously, at the time in 1915 when it sank, that would have been through British naval personnel working in the station at the time. And signals from Admiral Coke down in Cove and Haulbowline, Queens at the time, would have been sent through Valentia. And there's discourse, I know, on various articles on who the intended recipient was for the messages, whether it was for the Hellas Point tug, one of the auxiliaries of the naval service. They were looking for them to search for the U-boats in the area, but whatever the case may be, the Lusitania received the message and made way. And as we know, the rest is sad history with the massive loss of life at that time. And that's one of the parts of the history that Valentia played in the communication side with the Lusitania. That's the site. That's the station. 1951. That was after a major storm, and obviously there was a constant headache. Really, the tiles being ripped off. So they're all flat roofs now. Those walls are still three foot thick. They're very thick walls. On the back of that, just within about 50, 60, 80 meters, you have cliffs that are 300 feet high. And during the winter, we get savage seas that will constant sea spray and waves are hitting the windows. So it's quite a place to operate, but it gives you that sense when you have that weather. You certainly sympathize with the mariners that are out there. You have a feeling for them, and your alerts, your senses are certainly far higher at that stage. This is one of the first OIC when the Irish State was founded that took over, and that was Bosforan. His son, Richard Foran, was the launch authority for the Valentia lifeboat here for many years, up in the last 5 years, until he passed the mantle there to Colm O'Connell. So the Bosforan was there, worked till 1952, from 1922 to 1952, and he worked, I think it was Land's End, until his sad, he died sadly in that year. So that's the Bosforan. The sinkings of the SSGH Jones would have been, the SSGH Jones was an oil tanker operated by the Panama Transport Company, but it was used in the Second World War to transport oil for the war effort. And she was operating down south of the Azores, I understand at the time, when Paddy Burke, one of the watch officers at the time, and it was in 1942, and I'll read the account of it there. Again, in wartime, October 1942, radio officer Paddy Burke was on watch at Valentia at 0500 hours when he picked up a very weak distress signal. So weak he had to stop all motors in the station for silence so that he could be sure. The signal was being sent by Second Officer Smith from a lifeboat adrift 250 miles southwest of the Azores. This ship had been sunk by torpedoes, and he, with 40 other men, had been afloat for 5 days. Mr. Smith had a badly injured hand, which was becoming gangrenous, but he persisted in sending out SOS signals continuously from a hand-cranked radio set. Paddy Burke immediately alerted the British Admiralty, which had the men picked up by a Royal Navy destroyer and brought to Derry in 1972. And a picture of Paddy Burke here in 1972 with Captain Smith as he progressed to coming back to thank Paddy for saving the lives of all those people and his own life at the time. And that's that same radio room there where it said where the signals of Lusitania would have come from at that time. And there's a letter then, or a message telegraph from the inspector of wireless telegraphy, the case being up to 1951, that it was still administrated, the station was, by the UK Post Office. So, dear Mr. Foran, you'll be interested to know that as a result of Valentia's good work with the lifeboat from the SSGH Jones, 40 members of the crew were rescued after being adrift for 6 days. Valentia certainly did a good job on the 6th of June. Kind regards, yours sincerely. And this moves on to the 1970s. So you've moved on to valve technology at this stage, and they're now monitoring 2182. As I say, having monitored up to the 50s would have been 500 kilohertz, and all by WT. We're moving into the realm of radio telephony, as well as Morse, continuing all up to the beginning of the 90s. Very busy with a lot of at this stage in the 70s, with a lot of the fishing fleet off the west and southwest, passing messages, fish messages, link calls, and constantly busy that side, and any SAR coordination traffic that was accruing at that stage in the 70s. And this is the station as it is today in the last 10, 15 years. And you can see the picture there. The masts are almost in the same position, still operating RT, and would have been WT up to 1991, I think it was, when it ceased. You can see a picture of the Sikorsky S-61, which was part of the fleet of 4 Coast Guard helicopters. And that was updated in 2012 to S-92 Sikorsky helicopters. So 5 helicopters, 4 operational at any time with 1 backup. So that's the site, just looking down from the Slate Quarry picture of the station. So up to communication system developments up to 1950s, as I say, 500 kilohertz. We mentioned 1 megahertz and 1.6 megahertz. And also in the 1950s, radio telephony on 2182 and 500 kilohertz working frequencies. So we still work the 2182 kilohertz and our working frequencies. We often have may have medevac scenarios with fishing vessels or commercial vessels at range out to 200 nautical miles. And we'll work them initially on 2182, and we'll go then to our work, transfer to the working frequency, and work through our Medico protocols, patching them through to Medico Cork in this case, or possibly Medico Madrid if it's one of the Spanish fishing vessels, and triaging the casualty and working out the expediency with how fast they have to be off, and deciding then what resource to use. If it's long range, via helicopter evacuation, or if it's shorter range in, we may use a lifeboat in that case. In 1963, then there was new PI equipment installed. I know there was RT equipment, obviously from the 50s on there, and possibly even 40s, late 40s or mid to late 40s, possibly. Maybe the late 40s, I would say that it was more possibly, because I know there are incidents that various incidents on the West Coast where RT was used as well at that stage. 1972, a new link call system installed, again through radio telephony MF, and 1983, with the development of the new link call system, sorry, the new VHF coastal network, because all the time, obviously, we're talking about range, it's longer range, medium to long range, out to 200 miles. The inshore coastal communication network was limited, and the coverage was limited. So from the 1978 or 1978-79 SAR convention, it was stipulated and regulated that countries would look at installing VHF coastal networks to cover that, and from the SAR search and rescue network to be able to pick up maydays and PAN emergency information on that network. So that was, Ireland were at the forefront of that in Europe, and also between the UK and even before the UK developed this coastal network. So they did quite advance in that stage, and paging systems for the coastal networks and ordnance ice networks were developed by the Coast Guard at that time. 1992, we had medium range helicopters, the medium range helicopter at Shannon. Previous to this, we were still also using our Air Corps helicopters, but they wouldn't have had the range previous to 1992 out to 200 miles west. And we would have been dependent on the Sea Kings from the Royal Navy, and they would have been used at that time, requesting them to come in. So, that's changed a lot. That's obviously changed with the full fleet of aircraft that we have now. We still use the Air Corps fixed wing, the CASAs, for our top cover when we can, when we have to. But we coordinate a lot of the traffic south of the SAR area where we're responsible for, into the UK SAR area, because we operate a system of mutual assistance with the UK. And just the time and distance for our resources would bring us down, up to within 200 to 240 miles south to southwest, and that's well into the UK SAR area. So we'll coordinate in coordination and collaboration with the UK, and also the French authorities and the Spanish authorities where we have to. 1998, the end of Morse code. I think my dates mixed up there, and the last message is sent from Valentia at that time. One of the MV Ranga at the time, 1982. This coastal life-saving system, the OIC, Tip Murphy, Father Seamus Murphy, Dingle Coast Guard, they had used the Breach's Buoy rocket system. It was an antiquated system, but it was still operational, still really effective, and they managed to get all crew off by the use of that in Dingle 1982. So old technology still working. There's a picture of the Breach's Buoy. And that rocket system was used with great effect. So the Big Cat 1989 was washed up here, ran aground here in 1989, and the loss of, I think it was 2 or 3 members of that vessel. But the remainder of the crew were rescued by the local Coast Guard unit. Conditions at the time, the Sea King helicopter couldn't evacuate them, and they were evacuated by the local Coast Guard unit and by the Breach's Buoy system. So great kudos to the local Coast Guard unit for evacuating all at that time. And the Spanish language is something that was developed by virtue of the Brindy Shukru was the OIC at the time in the late 70s, late 70s and the 70s. We had a huge fleet off there, and many of those crews, even to this day, don't have a great command of the English language, so it could be quite difficult at times trying to interpret. So if you need to get the information quick, it's useful to have a few words of Spanish, and they had developed a narrow window of Spanish that they could communicate and get the key information out of them. Just an example there, in the last few years, we had a vessel off the Spanish coast, which was just outside VHF range and too close in for MF to work, and they hadn't received the Mayday on the Spanish side, but we had picked it up on 2 and 82, and we still have some members up there you can use. So Mayday, 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 aquí Barco Novo Hundinia, Barco Novo Hundinia, dígame su posición geográfica, por favor. Mi posición es a 51 grados y a 05 minutos norte, 12 grados y a 15 minutos oeste. Ok, Barco Novo Hundinia, para helicóptero de rescate, Sierra, 30 minutos a su position. So that's just a little example of the type of comms, basic comms. We really just need, if we don't have the position, we're at a loss. So, the key information is there, the position for us, and the information after that supplementary. We can go out with a Mayday relay and notify vessels in the area once we have the position, and we can get all our resources tasked and gunning for that position. They'll key in the position into the nav computers and the helicopter and navigating that position. So key information, and very useful to have just a narrow window of Spanish. Otherwise, some staffs may not have that, and we'll patch it through to MRCC Madrid or to our own interpreters that we connect to down in Castletown. This is an image of the Rambler 100 racing yacht. 2011 was the Fastnet race, and the yacht had capsized just after rounding the yacht in pretty poor conditions. The visibility was very poor at the time. There was some fog banks coming through, and the sea conditions were poor. And the keel of the vessel had fallen off. The EPIRBs hadn't activated. They didn't get any radio comms off that we had received. And but about 20 minutes into it, Mick Harvey, one of the crew, was up on the upturned vessel. They had 21 on board, and 5 crew members had got washed over. Thankfully, they were wearing survival suits. Mick Harvey remembered he had his PLB on. He had 2 PLBs, personal locator beacons, and he activated them. We received that message by virtue coming through the UK Kinloss, ARCC Kinloss at the time in Scotland, and that was sent through. And we were able to activate the Baltimore lifeboat and also our helicopters, then Shannon and Waterford. The Baltimore lifeboat in the vicinity was on exercise, and was requested to search the area and try and contact the yacht. PAN was initially broadcast, and Mayday. There was difficulties in resolving the position initially, because the initial signal on that person locator beacon hadn't hit the top satellites, so it took some time to resolve and get that position in closer. The Baltimore lifeboat discovered then, they picked up the hull with the 17 crew members on board, 16 crew members on board, and they were on the upturned vessel, and they were able to get them on board by the Y boat, transfer them into the lifeboat. So we still had the 5 crew members who were still in the water. That search now at this stage had gone on for the members in the water for probably up to 2 hours. And one of the crew members, the soon-to-be wife of the owner, George David, Wendy David, she was becoming hypothermic at this stage because her survival suit wasn't working properly. There was the zip had failed on it. The guys in Valentia at this stage, they had run a SAR map, an automatic system that we have. They can key in the coordinates. It takes in dynamic weather and sea tidal information, and was able to plot an estimated plot of the drift of the casualties from the datum position of the turned vessel. And they were instructed, the local dive boat was instructed to make course 055 degrees down that path. And within a mile and a half, this is the track there, as you see, a mile and a half, the casualties were spotted in the water. Wendy David was evacuated by the 115 helicopter from the Wave Chief and dive boat, and she was evacuated into the hospital. And Wendy was lucky to survive, and she had to be shot back a number of times. And they came back within the year, and it was quite a celebration and quite a lot of coverage at the time. I'm very grateful. One of the comments that George said at the time, George David, George was former CEO of Sikorsky at some point. When they looked up and they saw the helicopter above them, he was said to have said, "It's one of ours," as it was the S-61, the Sikorsky S-61 above them. So it was a successful rescue and all very happy. And that's the picture of the survivors on the return at the time. A big hoolie was had at the time on their arrival. A list of incidents of note over the years. I'm just going to run through them. I know I'm probably running out of time at this stage. 1915, the RMS Lusitania, as we know, and the implications for the US coming into the war, the First World War. 1,195 lives lost, 764 survivors. 1942, the SS G.H. Jones, 40 survivors rescued off the Azores, adrift 6 days. The American Skymaster aircraft, 39 survivors. I believe there was 6 or 7 lost, but that was coordinated by Valentia at the time in conjunction with the Shannon Air Rescue Coordination Center. So those people were very lucky to survive. It was spotted ditching at the time by a fishing vessel from Scotland at the time, and they were able to coordinate between the fishing vessel and also another commercial aircraft that was spotting, and managed to spot them in the end and was able to evacuate. They were able to evacuate then the passengers on to the fishing vessel. And then in 1954, KLM aircraft at Shannon, 28 survivors, 28 dead. And then KLM 1958, flight 607, 100 nautical miles west of Shannon. Sadly, tragically, no survivors, 91 passengers, 8 crew. only 34 recovered. And 1973, the Vickers submersible rescue recovery affected and coordinated by Valentia at the time, all rescued. And then 1979, involved in the coordination, MT Betelgeuse in the Whitty disaster, 50 lives lost, 27 recovered. 1979, the tragic Fastnet race yachting disaster, 18 persons lost their lives in this race. I think it was up to 300 yachts at that stage. 1982, the MV Ranga, all 15 crew rescued, 6 by breaches buoy. 1985, Air India, all on board lost their lives, tragically. 132 bodies recovered, 197 were lost at sea. 1986, the Kowloon Bridge, all 28 crew rescued, had gone aground on the Stags Rocks down the southwest. And then 1989, the Big Cat fishing vessel, 11 rescued, 3 lost. 1989, the MV Yarrawonga, all 30 crew rescued, coordinated by Valentia. And then in 2000, the St. Gervais, 4 crew, no survivors, 2 recovered, tragically and sadly. And then as we just went through, 2011, the Rambler, 21 crew, all rescued. And then 2012, the T-Bon Homme fishing vessel, 1 survivor, all 5 bodies recovered tragically at the entrance to Glandore at the time. And then 2013, the sailing vessel Astrid went aground on the rocks just south of Kinsale, 30 crew rescued, all mostly trainees, young trainees in their teens. And then 2021, more recently, the fishing vessel Eliav that was sinking off the mizzen head, 7 crew rescued by combination Rescue 115 and finally evacuated by Rescue 117, and the Marine Bravery Awards awarded to the crew of the 117. And that's the Marine Rescue Coordination as it is today. As you see, there's 4 desks, and we can there is the station now, it's interoperable between the 3 stations in the country, MRCC Dublin and MRSC Malin Head. So if one station needs to go offline for any reason, the other 2 stations can take up control of the other station. And this is done from time to time for either training or for either emergency power failures, in those sort of scenarios. At the desk here, we have one of our watch officers, and he's coordinating. He has this full radio console with all the sites in front of him. He has the DSE transmission screen. He has the tracking systems for all commercial craft and various other tracking systems through EMSA systems, the European Monitoring Maritime Safety Agency, that we can track through satellite traffic out to the west, out beyond 200 nautical miles and further to the south. Also we use Tetra radio communications to encrypt it to coordinate then with our interagencies between the police force, the fire service, and the medical, the hospital, the ambulance service. And we have our MF communications on the desk there as well. We communicate also on HF 5860. We're communicating with our SAR aircraft, and interagency, also interjurisdiction with the likes of the UK and France and Spain and all the other. Also, as I say, we often on nighttime we'd hear the UK, sorry, should I say the St. John's, on Newfoundland, we'd hear St. John's Coast Guard radio when the ionosphere collapses, and we can pick up those signals and the conditions are right. So we're always listening there. We can always hear it over there at night. It's a nice connection to have. So that's the coordination center of Valentia, and that's the medium range Sikorsky helicopter, the S-92, that came after the S-61. And that's a drone shot of the station looking in at the cliffs from the Rinadrillon Point, wireless point. And that's just the geo-distribution of the incidents. Let's say 2021, we had 480 lives saved, coordinated by the Coast Guard in conjunction with all our resources and our interagencies, and 4,500 persons assisted in that period. So in any year, could have up to 3,000 incidents. Last year being the busiest year since 2014, we had 2,900. The Valentia division, anything up to 900 incidents coordinated. So busy year, and I imagine we're going to have a similar busy year this year coming. And that's just you can see the purple polygon there. That's the area of responsibility before it goes into the UK SAR area. And the areas below the line there, the icons, are all the incidents that we would coordinate, medivacs, pollution incidents, in conjunction on behalf of the UK Coast Guard. So as I say, the whole principle of mutual assistance between the different Coast Guards, international, obviously the UK Coast Guard will be the one that we would deal with on the most because of the overlap there most frequently. And that's our tracking logging system, SIOS, that we use currently. That's a database that's building continuously, so all vessels passing through our area, AIS area, building a database of vessels to be able to coordinate at all times. And that's just a commemoration of the 100 years from 1914 to 2014. It's a plaque at the station and a list of the staff here from the beginning, all commemorated at that on these plaques, all the way up to 2014, due to be updated soon. Well, that's it. I'd just like to thank you very much for listening in, and appreciate the opportunity to talk to you and give you a history of Valentia Coast Guard going back to 1914. Thank you. Thanks, Chris.
I would like to thank you for your participation today and our partnership, as we've been partnering since 2016, and I look forward to partnering again in the years to come. Thank you very much. Have a great day.
I would like to thank Hearts Content for their excellent presentation, both to Doug Piercy and to Ted Rowe, and also to Derek Cassidy here and to John Draper. And we look forward to having you back next year. So I just asked Sean Walsh to finish off with a Morse transmission. The message that Sean signed off with read, "Heart's content from Valentia. Thanks for a great connection. For now, goodbye." Thanks again everybody for attending, and we'll see you all again next year.